This is it. This is Rome. This is the Roman Empire. Rome, it was a kingdom that never existed. Rome never existed. It was made up by scholars, archaeologists, with the backing of the Vatican and other interest groups. Rome was made up out of thin air. Rome is fake, fictitious, fiat. It never existed. Rome is not historical. It has absolutely no historical basis at all. But although Rome never existed, although Rome is not historical, Rome is a copy, a model of an empire that really did exist. See, Rome is really the Lydian Empire. The Lydian Empire is real. It is historical, but Rome is not. Rome is not historical and never was. But the Lydian Empire is the empire that was copied, forged, and hijacked, and moved to the land of cavemen. This was the work of the Caucasian, stealing black history and weaving his way into history, creating for himself a history, because the Caucasian is always trying to find ways to cover up his true identity, to cover up his true origin, where that origin is from the Watchers. This is why it becomes necessary for the Caucasian to steal black history and weave himself into that history, then whitewash all the black people and say, this is me, this is my history. That is what the Caucasian has done and continue to do to this day. And that is Rome. This is the Roman Empire. This is its true location in Namibia, Southwest Africa. This is it right here. And one of the evidence that we have that confirms the true location of the Roman Empire is that old famous saying, all roads lead to Rome. This is it here. The Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, it is an empire that's written all throughout literature, but this empire never existed. The Roman Empire was made up, and it was made up using primarily two elements. One is the Pelasgians, and the Pelasgians, they were a mixture of various tribes of people. The other element that was used to construct the Roman Empire is the Lydian Kingdom. The Lydian Kingdom, the Lydian Empire, with its succession of rulers. The Lydian Empire, it was ruled by several dynastic families. And it is these two elements that the Caucasian used. The Caucasian, with the backing of the Vatican and special interest groups. And all of this occurred in the 18th and 19th century. The engineering of the Roman Empire, that is when it was done, and the two elements that were used to build, to construct, to engineer the Roman Empire were the Pelasgian people and the Lydian Empire. And as we look at the 7 hills of Rome, we see that this is the Lydian Empire. These are the result, the residue of the Lydian Empire. And one of the confirmations that confirms, one of the evidence that confirms that this is the so-called Rome, which is really the Lydian Empire, are the roads. And the roads are still visible. And it was the so-called Roman Empire was the only empire that constructed a lot of roads, that built a lot of roads. And these roads, they built them in a straight line, because the mindset that the so-called Romans had in building their roads was that building them in a straight line will allow them to get to their destination or their enemy in a short amount of time. And so that's the mindset that went into building the roads in a straight line, or as straight as possible, as much as the terrain will allow them to do so. And that's what we see here. We see a lot of roads, and many of them are in a straight line, as straight as possible. All of this is a road. All these are roads here. And the Roman Empire, the so-called Roman Empire, was set, constructed upon 7 hills. Its main primary city was on 7 hills. This is an old forum. Look at it here. As we zoom in, our view becomes blurred because it is not meant for us to see what is there. But all of these are old Roman roads. All out here, all these roads. And the roads, they extend further out. The Romans, they built, the so-called Romans, they built a road that extends from the main city, and it went all the way down to Judah. They were the only kingdom, the only empire in history that built many, many roads connecting all of their sites, all of their provinces together. All of these roads, all out here. And it continues, goes further and further and further out. This is the old ancient Roman Empire, which is really the Lydian Empire. And this hill here, this hill has been identified as the as the Capitoline Hill. This is the Capitoline Hill, and the way that we know that this is the Capitoline Hill is because the so-called Capitoline Hill was set next to the Tiber River. And this is the Capitoline Hill. All other 6 remaining hills, they are set further away from the Tiber River. But this is the Capitoline Hill. And what is significant about this hill is that Hadrian, and Hadrian was a black man. All the Romans are black. They are Pelasgians. Hadrian, when he destroyed the remaining cities of Judah, he made a copy of Jerusalem. He made a copy of it. He constructed a copy of Jerusalem, and he built it here on the Capitoline Hill. And that second Jerusalem, it was of a square shape, and it was built in honor of the god Jupiter. And the god Jupiter, that's another name for Zeus. And on the Capitoline Hill, this is one of their main hills that housed the temple of Zeus, or the temple of Jupiter. And also, this is the hill where the United States gets its Capitol Hill from. The Capitoline Hill. And that's the significance of this hill here. It's the Capitoline Hill, the hill in honor of Jupiter, and it housed the second Jerusalem built by Hadrian in honor of Jupiter. And what is more important about that is this second Jerusalem that Hadrian built, as time went on, in 1948 and prior, the Jerusalem that was built in the Middle East, that Jerusalem is a copy of the Jerusalem that Hadrian built on the Capitoline Hill. That's the daughter of Babylon. The Jerusalem in the Middle East is a copy of the Jerusalem that Hadrian built on the Capitoline Hill in honor of Jupiter. Both locations were built in honor of the false god Jupiter, which is Zeus. So this is the Capitoline Hill, and that there are 7 hills. This is the Palatine Hill. Zoom in, see a lot of the remains left, but our view is somewhat blurred. Palatine Hill there. It's the Caucasian Hill. Caucasian Hill, located there. Esquiline Hill here. Now these names are not the ancient names that were given or used in history. These names are the current names of the 7 hills where the Vatican is located in so-called Europe. These are the names of the 7 hills in Europe. You see, the Vatican, it sits on 7 hills as well. It is a copy, a model of the fictitious Rome. And the names that are applied, these are the same names applied to the Vatican. The names that the Pelasgians use is hidden. And these names are used as a place name to cover up the true actual names that were used by the Pelasgians. So the Esquiline Hill, this was not, the Pelasgians never used this word here, but this is the current name of the Vatican and this location as well. And the Aventine Hill, located here. You zoom in, see some of the remains, and notice all the roads constructed. All the roads, these are all roads. And that's one of the evidence of the true location of a so-called fictitious Roman Empire, which is really the Lydian Kingdom, the Lydian Empire. And the Lydian Empire was taken over by the Pelasgians. That part of history is kept hidden. It's the Viminal Hill. So a lot of the remains here, and again, all the roads that are constructed. And the Quirinal Hill, located here. These are the 7 hills of the fictitious Roman Empire. And again, the roads are one of the evidence of the true location of this Roman Empire, which is really the Lydian Empire. Now, what the Caucasian is doing or has done in engineering the Roman Empire and constructing the Roman Empire is the Caucasian is attempting to build, create, and make a history for himself. And one of the ways that he has done that is not only through theft, but by engineering a fictitious empire called Rome. That way he can lay claim to a piece of history. But this is all stolen history. The Lydian Empire was black. The Pelasgians, they are all black. The Greeks are all black. But this is the location confirmed by all the roads that are built. Another piece of evidence that this is the true location and that this is the Lydian Empire. The Lydian Empire is located over here. So the old, ancient, and authentic roads, with that old saying, all roads lead to Rome, that is one piece of evidence that confirms the true location of the so-called Roman Empire, which is really the Lydian Empire. And this is an excerpt from Wikipedia on Roman province of Asia. Wikipedia finally got it right, kind of right. They are speaking some truth with the statement that the Roman province of Asia occupied almost exactly the same territory as that of the Lydian Kingdom. Now that is a truism. That is correct. This is correct information from Wikipedia. The Roman province is actually the Lydian Kingdom. Now this is somewhat of correct information from Wikipedia in that Roman province is exactly the Lydian Kingdom. Wikipedia says that it almost exactly, this part is incorrect. The Roman province, all of Rome, is exactly the Lydian Kingdom. But at least they did acknowledge that the Roman province is similar to the Lydian Kingdom. They acknowledged that much. But the correct information is, again, the Roman province is Lydia, the Lydian Kingdom. That's what the whole thesis and theory and concept of Rome is built upon, the Lydian Kingdom. And again, this is from Wikipedia. They have spoken some form of truth. In Maccabees, 1 Maccabees chapter 8, verses 1 through 15, this text, this passage in Maccabees is referring to Judas Maccabees being informed about the so-called Romans, which is actually the Pelasgians. And we're going to see that the text, it has been constructed in a way that is going to refer to the Pelasgians as well as Croesus, the Lydian. But the text, the bold-faced words, these are key words and phrases: friendships, gall, to pay tribute, pay them tribute, senators, senate, friends again, friendship, and the Romans took captive their wives and children. All these are important phrases. We're going to do a comparison of what is written in Maccabees. We're going to compare that to Herodotus, the histories written by Herodotus. And Herodotus, he gives more information, a little more detailed information that is lacking in the book of Maccabees. So in 1 Maccabees chapter 8, verses 1 through 15, we're going to look at verse 1 right now. In verse 1 it reads, "Now Judas heard of the fame of the Romans, that they were very strong and were well disposed towards all who made an alliance with them, that they pledged friendship to those who came to them." Now the first two terms that we encounter are Romans, but this one here, friendship. This was a historical event that actually happened. Destruction of your enemies and making friends with some of your enemies. Now that event, that's a historical event that did not apply to the Romans, because the Romans never existed. That historical event, Herodotus, he's going to let us know that historical event, it applies to Croesus. And again, this is histories by Herodotus. Herodotus, he starts off with Croesus was a Lydian by race, the son of Alyattes, and ruler of the nations which dwell on this side of the river Halys. I'm just going to jump down to here. This Croesus, first of all the barbarians of whom we have knowledge, this Croesus, he subdued certain of the Hellenes and forced them to pay tribute, while others he gained over and made them his friends. And Herodotus, he goes on to say those whom he subdued were the Ionians and the Aeolians and the Dorians, and the Dorians, they're Spartans, and these are all Pelasgians. The Dorians who dwell in Asia, and those whom he made his friends were the Lacedaemonians, and the Lacedaemonians, that's another name for Sparta. So the Lacedaemonians and the Dorians, these are Spartans, and Spartans are Pelasgians. So Croesus, he defeated the Pelasgians, but as time went on, the Pelasgians going to end up taking over the Lydian Empire. But what we see here that's important is that friendship in Maccabees is a reference to Croesus, the Lydian. And we got to keep in mind that Croesus, he was the only king that did that. The only king that defeated his enemies and made some of his enemies his friends. No other king did that in ancient history. So the reference in Maccabees about friendship, that's a reference to Croesus, the Lydian, the only king who defeated his enemies and made some of his enemies his friends. So with this comparison and contrast, this information from Maccabees and histories by Herodotus, Herodotus lets us know that the so-called Roman is actually Lydia, and that the part about friends, that is a reference to Croesus. Now let's take a look at verse 2 of 1 Maccabees, and it reads, and that they were very strong. This is still referring to the Romans, and that they were very strong. He had been told of the wars and of the brave deeds that they were doing among the Gauls, how they had defeated them and forced them to pay tribute. This phrase here is important: forced them to pay tribute. Now, there are many ancient kingdoms that defeated one kingdom and nation and made them pay tribute. There was no kingdom that defeated their enemies and then made friends of them. Only Croesus did that. And so in verse 2, the phrase forced them to pay tribute, that's another reference to Croesus. That's something that he did, and again, that's a real historical event recorded by several historians. Herodotus is just one of the historians that recorded this here. So in verse 2, we see another reference to Croesus, and comparing that to the histories by Herodotus, he lets us know that the phrase forced to pay tribute is a reference to Croesus. And the word Gaul, that has been erroneously defined, Gaul is another word for Italy. The true Italy is in Namibia. And Italy, the original black Jews, they never used this term. This term was not in circulation during the 1st century. This term, Italy, is a term of the 3rd and 4th century AD. But nonetheless, the so-called church fathers, they are aware of this term Italy. And this was a term during their day. And all the church fathers, they're black. So Italy, during the time of the church fathers, Italy was a term that was applied to Upper Galilee and Lower Galilee. And that's where the Gaul come from. You see, Gaul is a term that refers to Galatian and Galilee. And the English word Italy is from the Latin Italia. And this is where we get the Gaul, Galatian, and Galilee from. And in 1 Maccabees chapter 8, in verse 15, it reads, "But they have built for themselves a senate." And again, this is still referring to the so-called Romans. "They have built for themselves a senate chamber, and every day 320 senators constantly deliberate concerning the people to govern them well." Now, when we compare this to the histories by Herodotus, Herodotus gives us more information that is not there in Maccabees. And so this is what we find in Herodotus. We find that Lycurgus, he became ruler of Sparta. He was a Spartan. Lacedaemonian, that's another word for Spartans. And so Herodotus, he lets us know, he says, "Some say in addition to this that the Pythian prophetess also set forth to him the order of things which is now established for the Spartans." So Herodotus, he's telling us that Lycurgus, he was king of the Spartans. And during his kingship, Lycurgus, he established that which appertained to war. And so Herodotus, he tells us that Lycurgus, his brother's son, Lycurgus, his brother was Leobortes. So Herodotus, he's letting us know that Lycurgus, he became the guardian of his brother Leobortes. He became guardian of Leobortes' son, which is his nephew. And Herodotus says, as soon as he became guardian, he changed all the prevailing laws. Now, becoming guardian means that he is king of the Spartans. He became king of the Spartans. And as soon as he became guardian, he changed all the prevailing laws and took measure that they should not transgress his institutions. And after this, Lycurgus established that which appertained to war, namely the Enomotes and the Triakites and common meals. And in addition, he also established, in addition to this, like Kugros, he established the ephors and the Senate. Now the ephors are the elderly people, elderly men. They are the senators of the Senate. They're called ephors. The Spartans called them ephors. And the Senate was started by the Spartans, not the Romans. And the Spartans, they are Greek. They are the Pelasgian Greeks. And this information from Herodotus gives us insight that the Pelasgian Greeks, they are starting to rise to power. They established a Senate, and they rise into power, and they will eventually take over the Lydian Empire. And Croesus is no more on the scene. And so the Senate mentioned in 1 Maccabees chapter 8 verse 15, this is a reference to Lycurgus, the Spartan, and Spartans are Pelasgians. It's a reference to Lycurgus starting the Senate with the senators called the ephors. Now the Pelasgian Greeks, they didn't say the word Senate, they used the word Gerousia. So Herodotus, he let us know that the Senate mentioned in Maccabees, that was started by Lycurgus. Lycurgus, he was a Spartan, and he started the Senate and established the ephors, which are the senators. And so with this information, the ephors, they were elected leaders of Sparta. And with the information in Maccabees about deliberating, the same information in Maccabees applies to the ephors, the senators. They were elected leaders of Sparta, and they deliberated with the kings of Sparta. So this is the origin, the foundation of the fictitious Roman Empire. This is the origin and foundation of Rome. This is where the whole concept and idea of a Roman Senate, it was stolen, copied, confiscated from the Greeks, the Pelasgian Greeks, from the Spartans, from Lycurgus. That historical information of Lycurgus was copied, and the names were changed and rewritten and applied to the Caucasian as being the historical Romans, which were and are not historical, but are fictitious. That is what the Caucasian has did. They made up an empire out of thin air, and they took the historical Senate from the Greeks, the Pelasgian Greeks who are black. They took that and called them all their own, and changed the names and whitewashed the black Greeks and made them Romans. Now the Pelasgians and the Athenian Greeks, the Ionians, along with the other tribes that were in that area of the Aegean Sea area, and in Greece, and including Macedonia, all the people of Macedon. These are people who are genetically the same. And this information here, this has been done, the research has been done by scientists and geneticists. These are the names of the people who did the research. They put forth this article, the HLA, Genes in Macedonia and the Sub-Saharan Origin of Greeks. They did the research, and this is an excerpt of the article that they published, letting us know that Greeks are genetically related to Ethiopians. And this article, it can be looked up and verified. It is on the internet. But the HLA genes in Macedonians and the Sub-Saharan origin of the Greeks, it has been verified and concluded unquestionably that the original Greeks, they were black, and that they are genetically related to Ethiopians. And the term Ethiopians, that's a broad term, and it is said that it came from the Greeks themselves. It's a broad term that encompasses various groups of people, black people. It means burnt face, but it does not apply to one specific group. It encompasses a lot of tribes who fall in the category of dark skin and some brown skin. And so the fictitious Roman Empire was constructed and engineered on two main elements, two main premises. One is the Pelasgians, the other one is the Lydian Empire, and of all its rulers, specifically Croesus. The so-called Caesars of the Roman Empire that was stolen, copied, forged, and hijacked. Stolen from the Lydian Empire, where the historical Lydian Empire that was ruled by several dynastic families, beginning with the Heracles families. The Heracles, they were overthrown by the Menati family, and each family, each dynastic family, they ruled in a succession of rulers. That whole concept was taken from the black history of the black Lydians and applied to a fictitious empire and created Caesars, a succession of Caesars. That's where the whole concept of Caesar and a succession of Caesar came from. It came from the Lydian Empire, the Heracles family dynasty, and the Menati family dynasty. And again, the Senate, that came from the Greek, the Pelasgian Greeks of Sparta, the Spartans. Like Kyros, he's the one who started the Senate with the senators that he called ephors. And the Senate that they started was called the Gerousia. And the people of the Roman Empire, the fictitious Roman Empire, again, they are and were Pelasgians. The Pelasgians came to power. They took over the Lydian Kingdom. Croesus was long gone. The Persians, they defeated Croesus. The Pelasgians, they rose to power and took over the Lydian Empire. And they expanded it, built many roads, as we have looked at. And these Pelasgians, they were a mixture of various tribes. And they ruled Persia, Lydia, Greece, Macedonia, Syria, Israel, Babylon, Medes, Assyria, and Egypt, and many other kingdoms they ruled. And the Pelasgians, they are the indigenous Greeks, and they are black. Now looking at, there's a prophecy in Numbers chapter 24, verse 24. And that prophecy reads, "And ships shall come from the coast of Kittim, and shall afflict Asher, and shall afflict Eber, and he also shall perish forever." That's in Numbers chapter 24, verse 24. And this information is significant because it let us know that the Roman Empire is not the empire of iron, that it never existed, that it never ruled over Asher and Eber. You see, Israel, the original black Jews, we are from Eber. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the descendants of Eber, and that makes us the descendants of Eber as well. And according to Numbers chapter 24, verse 24, this prophecy is letting us know that Eber and Asher will be ruled by Kittim, not by Rome, nor by any other nation. They're going to be ruled by Kittim, and that prophecy came to pass. You see, it is Kittim that tore down Jerusalem. 70 AD destruction was done by Greeks, and the 132 to 136 AD destruction was done by Greeks. There was no such thing as Rome. Rome did not exist. Pontius Pilate, he was of the Lydian stock. And there's more information that is hidden and overlooked. But Numbers chapter 24 verse 24 specifically says that Kingdom, and Kingdom is Greece, that Kingdom will rule Asher and Eber. Eber is Israel. And that is what happened in history. And once again, Kingdom is Greece. Kingdom is not Rome. Kingdom refers to Greece and Javan, or Javan. Now, what's looking at Numbers 24, verse 24, that brings us here to Daniel. Daniel chapter 2, verse 32 to 45. This is where Daniel interprets the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel lets us know that the empire of iron, that is not the Roman Empire. The empire of iron is the Lydian Empire. The Lydian Empire was the empire of the Iron Age. But you see, the Pelasgians, they were there as well, and they took over the Lydian Empire. The Lydian Empire was ruled by the family of Heracles, and then they were overthrown by the Mennonite family. And the Lydian people are descendants of Lud, and Lud is the son of Asher. And this fits the Numbers 24, verse 24 prophecy that says Kingdom, which is Greece, is going to rule Asher and Eber. And so with the prophecy of Numbers chapter 24, verse 24, that states again that Kingdom will rule over Asher and Eber, that historical event happened where the Pelasgians, that's Kingdom, because they are Greeks, they're indigenous Greeks, the original Greeks, black Greeks. They ruled over Lydia, which is Asher, and then Israel, which is Eber. And so with Daniel, with the statue of the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the head made of gold refers to Babylon, that's Nebuchadnezzar. The silver of the arms and chest is Persia and Medes. Now this is where the error comes in when we get to the brass part of the belly and the thighs. The kingdom of brass is said to be Greek, which is wrong. This, the kingdom of brass, is Macedonia. Macedon. That's the Alexander the Great, the so-called Alexander the Great, and he was a black man. All of Macedonia are and were black. So the belly and thigh of brass refers to Macedon, Macedonia. And from there, then it moves to the Iron Age. In the Iron Age is Lydia. Now there were many other nations ruling in the Iron Age, but they were not a world power. Lydia was a world power that ruled in the Iron Age. So the Greeks, they ruled. They were the one that came to power. They ruled, and that makes the Greeks a kingdom of the Iron Age as well. And so those are the four empires that are prophesied and were prophesied to rule the world. Egypt was one, but Egypt is not mentioned in the Nebuchadnezzar dream. It starts with Babylon, then it moves to Medes and Persia, then it moves to Macedon, and from there it moves to Greek. But the leg of iron refers to the Greek Empire. Rome never existed. which means the leg of iron is not a reference to Rome, and that is contrary to history. Rome is not historical, Greek is. The Pelasgians overtook the Lydian Empire of iron, and they ruled. They were ruling in the 1st century as well. And one of the evidence that let us know that the Pelasgians were in rule and power in the 1st century AD is the 17 AD Lydian earthquake. There was an earthquake that happened in 17 AD, and it destroyed a lot of the cities of the Lydian Empire. And Sardis was one of the main cities that was destroyed. Sardis was destroyed and it never recovered. But this earthquake, it gives the evidence, when we look at the cities that were damaged, it gives evidence of the people that were dwelling in each city that was damaged by the earthquake. And the people that were living in Sardis were the Lydians mixed with the Pelagian Greeks. Another city was Magnesia, and this was a Greek city. Timnos as well, another Greek city. Philadelphia, this here city was Pelagian Greeks mixed with the descendants of Lydia. Apollonius, Mostine, Hierapolis, Marinas, and Timnolus, and Pergamum. These cities, even Ephesus, these cities were a mixture of the Pelagian Greeks and the descendants of Lydia. And those are the people who dwelt in these cities during the earthquake in the 1st century. Now, another thing that the earthquake lets us know, that gives the evidence that the Lydian Empire, it was alive and thriving during the 1st century AD and afterwards. The Lydian Empire, the power is shifted to different rulers, which were the Pelagian Greeks. They took over, and the evidence for that is this earthquake in 17 AD. The 17 AD earthquake lets us know that the cities of Lydia were filled with the Pelagian Greeks along with the descendants of Lydia, and in the histories by Herodotus. So Kidam is Cyprus, and the Numbers chapter 24 verse 24 prophecy that lets us know the area where those rulers were going to come from. The rulers came from Kidam, and it gives us the geographical location, which is Cyprus. And Cyprus itself, it is named after a plant, a henna plant, called Cupressus. And Cupressus is one of several genera of evergreen conifers. That's where we get the name Cyprus, and Cyprus is Kidam. And this let us know the location of the rulers who were going to rule Asher and Eber, which means Numbers 24 verse 24 rules out any possibility of a fictitious Roman empire, and let us know that Cyprus, Kidam, will be the ruler. And this is just additional information. The original Italy is in Namibia, Southwest Africa. The English word Italy is from the Latin word Italia, and Italia is from Gallia, and Gallia is Galilee, and also Galatia. And there is Upper Galilee and Lower Galilee, and Upper and Lower Galilee is Italy. Now, the word Italy, that was not used in the 1st century. Italy was used in the 3rd and 4th century, and it was used along with the other terms such as Transalpine Gaul, and Cisalpine Gaul. Transalpine Gaul is Lower Galilee, and Cisalpine Gaul is Upper Galilee. So as time went on, the new words were introduced to refer to the same old region of Galilee, the Upper and Lower. The original black Jews referred to Galilee as Upper Galilee and Lower Galilee, and as Asia, Asia Major and Asia Minor. As time went on, new terms were introduced in the 3rd and 4th century, such as Italy, Transalpine, which is Lower Galilee, and Cisalpine, which is Upper Galilee. These are the 3rd and 4th century terms that the original black Jews, they never used. In recap, the invention, the engineering of the Roman Empire is the Caucasian's attempt to create a history for himself, and he does so by way of theft, stealing the black history of Africa. And not only the black history, but the scriptures, the texts, the land as well, with all of the medicinal plants and minerals, all stolen by the Caucasian, because the Caucasian needed a history to cover up his identity and to cover up his true origin as the origin from the Watchers, the fallen angels. And that's the premise, that is the foundation, that is the reason for the invention, the engineering of a fictitious empire called Rome. It is to cover up and create a history of their own, thereby covering up their true identity. That is Rome.